Hey guys, I'm Li Jingjing. I'm being featured by the New York Times. In the New York Times latest article talking about vloggers in China, they mentioned me. So thanks NYT for promoting my travel vlogs, especially those I made in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region and in Hainan. I'm dying to have more audiences watching the real stories about China. So the NYT put some of my travel vlogs in Xinjiang that I published on my personal YouTube channel in its article. You know what? It would have been super amazing if they also included the video clips of me visiting mosques, interviewing imams, several religious figures.
阿拉穆斯林马斯林穆斯林米利萨尼沃里耶地希，这是我们的穆罕默德圣人说的。什么叫穆斯林？
我们去年整个穆斯林在地的新疆的2000多万人全部已经脱贫。
Because that would have clearly shown how silly and ridiculous the genocide accusations are. I also interviewed a former US Marine Corps who keeps exposing the US government's global interferences, the crimes done by US government and military. So feel free to include that video in the article too. Now there are more eyes on me to learn the truth about what's really happening in China, my home country. This video is the answer to some interview questions from the reporter of the New York Times. And some of you may have the same questions for me, so this video is also for you. A few days ago, the reporter Paul Moser from the New York Times reached out to me saying he was working on 2 articles that involve me. In both articles, it says Ms. Li did not respond to the request for comment. Well, the fact is, I didn't see that request because Paul sent the request to 2 platforms that I don't really check my inboxes on, LinkedIn and Facebook. And then on Twitter, I told Paul that I'm very happy to answer your questions and I will get back to you on Tuesday or Wednesday. But they still ran the story before I reply. So if you really want to include my comments, my reply in the article, shouldn't you just go to the right platform in the first place? Or just wait for my answer when I clearly told you which day I will reply? So how about let's see what NYT asked me and let me comment in this video. So let me read out the questions that Paul sent to me. Paul sent to me 2 questions on Twitter DMs. The first one is, on your personal YouTube channel, you do not identify yourself as a CGTN employee, and YouTube does not label your account as government-funded media. Do you think this might be misleading to people who watch your videos? Well, Paul, you already said the answer in your questions. Because this is my personal YouTube channel. I had this personal YouTube channel when I was still a student at a journalism school and started to publish videos since 2012. I hated the older videos because the quality isn't great. But I've been using this account for all these years. I used this account when I was working for other companies. I used this account when I was a student. And maybe one day my current employer will change. Or maybe one day I will forever quit journalism. Who knows what will happen in the future, right? So is it really necessary to state who your current employer is? And I do say I am a journalist from China on my channel. And if you go through the comment sections on my YouTube, on my Twitter, you will notice that my followers are fully aware what I do, who my current employer is. Some even said they saw my work on CGTN and they liked it and then decided to follow my personal account. So how am I misleading people who clearly knows what I do? And there are people like me that follows me, and there are people that hate me that follow me. And probably there are some people who follow me for other reasons. Whether they feel they are misled, probably you should ask them this question. I believe many individuals that worked for the New York Times, the Washington Post, BBC, CNN, The Guardian, all have their own social networks, right? Do they all state who their current employers are? And don't you think they should be labeled as corporate-funded media so the public won't be misled? But I totally understand your concerns, Paul. You're worried that the state is funding me to mislead people. But everything I say is truly what I feel and what I believe as a Chinese myself. No one is forcing me to say anything on my personal channel. The videos I made are fact-based with the research I've done myself, with the videos and images I captured myself as I travel around China. And don't you think media like Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, who are referring to themselves as independent, but actually receive fundings from the US government and keep pushing false narratives in countries and regions that the US government is trying to bring influence to, are misleading people? Don't you think they should be labeled as US state-funded media? And don't you think organizations like World Uyghur Congress, Uyghur Tribunal, the so-called activists Rushan Abbas, all receive fundings from the National Endowment for Democracy, who took over CIA's job, are misleading people? And furthermore, these so-called activists only became active on social networks after they got fundings from the US government. Isn't that a bit concerning to you? Have you brought up the same concerns to them? And then how do you feel about this? The US Congress even passed an act that authorized to be appropriated $300 million for each of fiscal years 2020 through 2024 for the Countering Chinese Influence Fund to counter the malign influence of the Chinese Communist Party globally. And by that, they mean creating negative propaganda about China. For example, on this Zimbabwe newspaper, it says US government is funding and training journalists in Zimbabwe to intentionally spread disinformation lies on media and social media platforms to discredit Chinese businesses. Private media journalists are being trained by an outfit called Information for Development Trust, or IDT, which poses as an independent investigative journalism center with the founding of the US Embassy in Harare. And one source said US Embassy officials bragged during the workshop that they had extended funding to the project and had also previously sponsored media institutions on the so-called accountability issues. They also funded some journalists that are now strategically positioned within the independent media. So since you are investigating who are state-funded media, maybe you should look into that. Now comes to the second question from Paul. In the second question, he said, more broadly, I noticed that you seem to play a key role in the CGTN efforts to build out a broader range of content creators that it supports with funding, access, and publicity. Is this a new CGTN initiative? What is the thinking behind it? Well, I don't know whether you looked into CGTN's other work either on television or social networks, because if you did, you would notice that I'm really not a key role, because there are so many experienced, prestigious journalists, anchors who had been working in this news industry for decades, who had years of field experience in the US, in Europe, in Africa, across the world. So compared to them, I'm really not a key role. But thanks for watching my content and think I'm important. But it's also kind of insulting when you think all the resources and connections I've got are granted by some big bosses. I can go to certain places, interview some people, get some stories because I contact people through every means possible. Just like how you contact me through different means. And after talking, some trust me as a reporter and continue to cooperate with me. And of course, there will be some people will decide whether they want to take your interview request based on which media you are working for. There are some people who are really willing to talk to me when they find out that I'm a CGTN reporter. And there are some people who rejected my interview request either because they don't like me or my employer. I build my connections and reputations in the circle by myself, like every journalist did in the world. As an experienced journalist yourself, I think you can understand that, right? And funding, publicity, all I got is my monthly salary, which is not high anyways. Journalism or media is just not a highly paid industry. If I were looking for money, I would have moved to other industries long before. And publicity. I work in the media, which brings publicity to other people. And these are my answers to your questions, Paul. Honestly, your questions sound a bit predetermined, but I kind of understand why you wonder so many people, either Chinese or expats living in China, are speaking out on their platforms. The answer is quite simple. We feel the country we are living in are misrepresented. As a Chinese myself, I feel my country, my culture is being misrepresented in the general Western media, especially during this huge anti-China propaganda war. We feel the importance of telling people the truth here. So instead of questioning our motivations of telling the truth about the country we are living in, maybe you want to consider why there's so much misinformation, disinformation on the portrayal of China on media like the New York Times. Why lots of people are no longer regarding mainstream media as the honest source of information.